Let's look at how to use the ML2. When you open the scene, this is what you're going to see. There's a system of hanging lights and there's a system of floor lights. These work exactly the same way. They're just designed for different applications. So the hanging lights have C-clamps and are meant to be used overhead, and the floor lights don't have C-clamps and are designed to sit on top of staging or platforms. So I'm only going to run through the hanging lights today, but just know that the systems work exactly the same way. Before we start, there are three things we need to make this system work. The first is the Redshift environment. This is what gives us the actual volumetrics. I've included one here in this scene, but if you want to add one to your own scene, you can come to Create, Environment, Redshift Environment. I've also added some noise to break up the haze a little bit. If you don't like this, you can just delete this texture tag right here. Or if you want to play with the look of it, come into the texture here and edit this, and then you can play around with the noise to get it to look any way that you want. We also have to go to the Redshift render view. I'm going to come to the settings cog here. And when I open this up, I've enabled bloom and I've enabled streak. And this is what's going to give us the lens flare around the actual head of the light. So make sure you have those three things set up before you begin. Let's look at how to operate the ML2. All the controls you need can be found in this one tab inside of the attributes, starting with its movement. So to focus the light, we have pan and tilt controls. And this is going to let you position the light beam wherever you want. Works just like a regular light. And then below this are all the controls for the actual light itself, starting with the gobo. So first we have color here, and you can just dial in any color that you want. And if you twirl this open, there are multiple systems for kind of picking color inside of Cinema 4D. You can use whichever one of these you are most comfortable with here. Just take this back to white. Below this is a slot for an actual gobo. So this is just like loading any other texture map or image map inside of Cinema 4D. You can either drag and drop a JPEG or a PNG into this field, or if you hit the folder button here, it'll launch your Finder or Explorer. So I'm just going to drag in a file here. And now it's going to ask me, just like a texture, do you want to make a local copy of this file, or do you want to keep it where it is on its hard drive? I want to keep it on the hard drive, so I'm just going to say no. And like that, we have a gobo in here. So let's zoom in just a little bit. Actually, you know what? We'll just move the light closer to us a little bit. So now I'm using this black and white image here for the gobo, but I can also come in and now blend color with this so that you have kind of the best of both worlds here, where you can use and kind of tint this any way that you want. Now I'm going to take this back to white for a second, and I'm going to bring in a different kind of image. So this is just a black and white JPEG, but you can also use color images. So if I bring in this JPEG, and so then the light will actually work kind of like a projector. To get the JPEG to show in its true form, you want to make sure that your color is set to pure white. You can actually come in and mix these two together. So now I'm mixing my color with the actual colors inside of the JPEG. It's totally up to you. But if you've made artwork, if you have a logo, if you have client colors that you need to be specific, you want to make sure that this is set to pure white. And then the JPEG is going to show you exactly what you expect, right? All right, so I'm going to just take this back here to the pattern that we had before. And so below this is softness. And so what this is going to do is this is going to let us kind of run the barrel on the instrument so that if we want, we can kind of soften the focus of the JPEG. And you can really take this, you know, really far out of focus if you want, or just a little bit just to kind of take the edge off. Totally up to you. Then we have the controls for the actual light itself here. So I've got the light on and off. You can just turn this on and off with this switch. And then all Redshift lights have intensity and exposure. So I've put both of these controls in here. So you can dial the intensity of the light up and down, or if you're more comfortable with exposure or you just need a lot of punch out of it, you can play around with this. Totally up to you. With all of these controls, if you right click on the name of the function, you can always come back to reset to default to set it to its starting place. Now, separate from controlling the intensity of the light, there is a slider here for the volumetric intensity. So you can control independently the amount of kind of contribution to haze that the light is making from the scene. The intensity and the exposure will definitely affect that, but this just gives you a way of, you can kind of crank up the intensity of the light, but you can keep the haze and control how much you want per light with this slider. And then we have the cone angle. So this is just going to let you control kind of the size of the overall beam. If you bring it way down here, you probably then will need to compensate with some exposure to keep the light kind of visible as you really crank it down. And then this light maxes out at 40 degrees, just based on the lamp and the housing inside of it. And then we've got fall off angle. This is just controlling the sharpness of the edge of the spotlight. So it works separately from the softness of the actual gobo. You can see if I take this down all the way, we just get a really crisp edge all the way around. And so the fall off angle is going to let us just kind of blend the edge of this actual cone of light, which could be good for lining up other patterns if you want. And then below this is include and exclude. So just like every other light inside of Cinema 4D, I'm going to just get rid of this gobo here for a second, just to make it a little bit easier to see. And I'm going to lower the volumetrics to make it even easier to see. So by default, this is set to exclude. So anything I take from the scene and I drag and drop it in will be affected. So if the cube is set to exclude, you can see that the light is no longer hitting the cube. Or if I were to reverse this and say include, now the light is only hitting the cube and nothing else. So just like every other light, and obviously you can stack multiple objects in here, just like any other Cinema 4D light, this works the same way. I've just decided to include these controls right here inside of the unit. Now we'll look at the ML2 CS, which stands for cloner straight. This light is going to work pretty much the same way as the ML2, but we've added cloning capability right inside the control panel just to keep everything inside of one control set for you. So the pan and the tilt here are going to work exactly the same. And the actual light functions are going to work the same here. So if we were to drop a gobo in here, we can add a pattern to it. And if we want to get into color stuff, we can. And then above that, you'll see there are these cloner tools set up in here. So we've got our cloner count. And so we can just keep adding more lights to the scene as we need. The slider will max out at 20, but you can keep going in the field here up to 100 lights. Take this back down. And then below this, we have our position. So in X, by default, we're spaced out on 4-foot centers. And so we can move this slider here. We can also go negative if we want. And again, the slider has limits, but the field does not. So you can really space these out kind of any way that you want. And then we can also then, we can move in Y up and down, and we can move in Z for kind of upstage and downstage. So you can control these any way that you want. Take these back to 0. And then I've also included this step rotation H. So this just allows for some slight curvature along that straight line. There is a separate system for curved truss. This is really designed mostly with the floor units in mind. If you have a curved apron or a curved front of the stage or a platform and you just need a little bit of bend in it, this is going to help you kind of get there. And then all of the other controls for the light are going to just work exactly the same as all the other lights in this system. So intensity, cone angle, include, exclude, all of this works exactly the same. Now I'll show you the ML2 CC. This is for cloner curved. This is for using on circular truss. The controls are going to work pretty much the same as the other lights here. So let's go ahead and add a gobo into this. And you can see that the pan and the tilt here are going to work the same way as all the other lights. You can get some interesting things going on with this. And then the actual light itself for, adjusting color and playing around with the exposure or the volumetric intensity, all of that works exactly the same, include, exclude. The cloner controls in this are a little bit different. We've got our count, so we can up the number of units that we add to this. Again, the slider's going to max out, but you can keep going beyond that inside of the field if you want. And then we also have our radius, so you can adjust this to whatever kind of size circular truss you are working with. And then finally, there are start and end angles. So by default, this is going 360 degrees around, but by adjusting these sliders, either the start or the end angle, you can really dial in any kind of arc or partial circle that you want along the way to set this up kind of any way that you need. And everything else is going to work exactly the same as the other lights. Now let's look at the ML2 scale. This one is a little different. It's the unicorn of the ML2 series. The light functions all work just like the rest of the system, so this should be familiar to you. But the way we interact with the Gobo is a little bit different. With the ML2 and the CS and even the CC, you can add the Gobo and you can add color to it, but you can't make any adjustments to the actual Gobo as far as scaling it or rotating it. So this light lets you do that. Unfortunately, though, it's at the expense of color. So any color that you need inside of the imagery of the Gobo, you have to actually build that into the artwork itself. But I felt like the color and the Gobos were the most important part, so the bulk of the ML2 system is built off of that. I did want to include this light, though, in case you have a special need for a logo or a very specific piece of key artwork that you wanted to display. So let's just talk about it. The pan and tilt are going to work exactly the same as all the other lights. And then there's a Gobo slot here for you to add in your JPEG or your PNG. We can control the light on and off and intensity. And then down here we have transform. So I can scale the actual pattern here. Let's just add a little bit more intensity here so you can see it. So scale here relates kind of to tiling. So the higher the number, the smaller the pattern here. So if I start to raise this up, you'll see that I get more iterations of the pattern, and so it gets smaller. And then if I go the other way here, you'll see that the pattern starts to get larger. So we can control the scale. Then we can rotate. So if you need to spin this around, you can do that. And then there's offset U and V, which just lets you kind of slide this either left and right or upstage, downstage to make kind of subtle adjustments here. You can see the pattern kind of scrolling through here as we move this around. And so this one is just a little bit different. I still feel like the color and the regular Gobo controls of most of the lights will work for 99% of the applications. But I did want to include this one in case you just have a special need to be able to control or animate the actual art. I'm also going to provide a Photoshop template for your gobos for the ML2. You can pretty much drag any piece of artwork you want in there. This is just set up to fit into the light perfectly. I've got a simple scene here. There's a folder that is masked to the circle of visibility. And so all you need to do is just drop any artwork you want inside of here to make it kind of work. So if I were to take, let's say, this piece of artwork here and just drop it in, and then we can scale it up. And now you'll see, since it's inside of this folder, we can get rid of this at this point. Now it's masked perfectly to where we want it to be. And then you can just flatten this, save it out as a PNG or a JPEG, and drop it into the light.